still here, don't answer.
There are places in America that were built on blood, sweat, and silence, places that once thrived, then fell into ruin. Their stories swallowed by the earth itself. Ashwood Mine is one of them. Tucked deep into the Appalachian Mountains, Ashwood was once the pride of the region. In the late 1800s, its tunnels carved into the mountain like veins, pulling coal from the dark for the hungry engines of the industrial age. For a time, it brought prosperity, but at a cost measured in lives. Collapses, explosions, men buried alive. The mine demanded sacrifice. They say Ashwood never closed properly. There was no ceremony, no memorial, just boarded up entrances and silence. But the locals still whisper about it. They warn hikers to avoid the old shafts, to ignore the strange echoes that rise from the hills at night, and most of all, never to answer if you hear your own name called from the dark. Because the mine, they say, remembers every voice that was lost within it, and sometimes it lets them out. I heard about Ashwood Mine when I was researching forgotten places in Appalachia. I'm a documentary photographer, drawn to ruins and relics. My work takes me into abandoned hospitals, shuttered churches, ghost towns clinging to existence. Ashwood caught my attention because it barely appeared on any records, almost as if it had been erased. That secrecy, that silence, intrigued me more than anything. When I arrived in town, I mentioned the mine to the bartender at a small roadside tavern. His expression darkened instantly. "You're not going there," he said flatly. I told him I was, that I was documenting forgotten history. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Then take this advice. Don't go after dark. And if you hear anything at all, don't go further in. Because the mine doesn't sleep. Not really. It just waits." It was late autumn when I made the hike up the ridge. The forest was brittle and skeletal, the trees groaning in the wind. The trail was half swallowed by leaves, and the deeper I went, the more the world seemed to hold its breath. I found the entrance where the hillside sagged inward, the timbers rotting, the mouth gaping black. The air that drifted out was colder than it should have been, damp and heavy, carrying the faintest scent of rust and earth. I set up my camera, adjusting the tripod. The sun was falling fast, and shadows bled long across the forest. I told myself I would only take a few shots, maybe step just inside, enough to capture the atmosphere. But when I lifted my lens toward the dark opening, I swore I heard something soft, low, almost like a sigh. It was gone as quickly as it came. My mind rationalized it as wind, but a seed of unease lodged itself deep in my chest. Still, I stepped inside. The first stretch of the tunnel was tight and low, the ceiling braced by collapsing timbers. My flashlight beam swept across rusted tools left behind, buckets, a shattered lantern. The deeper I went, the more I felt it, the pressure of the earth. The silence so total it pressed into my ears until I could hear my own blood. I set up my recorder, capturing the atmosphere. And that was when I heard it again. A sound. Faint. So faint I thought I imagined it. It was a voice.
Come! Help me down here. Daniel, come back.
At first, just one distant, muffled, as though speaking through stone. A single word. Help Primera. Frose. The hair on my arms rose, my stomach twisting. No one was supposed to be down here. The mine had been abandoned for over a century. I told myself it was water dripping, stone shifting, my mind filling silence with sound. But then it came again. Clearer. Stronger. A scream. It ripped through the tunnel, echoing so violently that I dropped my flashlight. The beam spun across jagged walls before settling in the dirt. My breath caught, chest tight. It wasn't just one scream. It was dozens, dozens of voices overlapping, shrieking, begging, wailing, as though the walls themselves were crying out. The sound was deafening, yet when I clamped my hands over my ears, I realized something that froze me to my marrow. The sound wasn't in the air. It was inside my head. I stumbled backward, tripping over an old rail. The flashlight's beam quivered against the wall, and that was when I saw a tan imprint. A hand, pressed into the coal seam, its fingers stretched wide as though clawing through the stone, and beside it, another, and another. Dozens, hundreds, all frozen mid-scratch, reaching, grasping. The screams rose higher. I ran deeper into the mine without thinking, disoriented, searching for another way out. My beam caught fragments as I fled, helmets half buried in rubble, boots sticking from the earth. Faces carved into the walls like the mountain itself had swallowed men whole. The air grew hotter, choking with dust, and then, suddenly, silence. I stopped, chest heaving, sweat cold on my skin. The quiet was worse than the screaming. And then, from behind me, I heard my name, whispered low, familiar. I turned, raising the light. There, half shrouded in shadow, stood my brother. He had died years ago in a car accident. And yet, there he was, his face pale, his eyes dark hollows, his mouth moving as if trying to form words. "Come with me," he whispered. "Don't leave me here." I stumbled backward, shaking my head, muttering that it wasn't real. But behind him, more shapes began to emerge. Men in miners' gear, their faces broken, their eyes missing, their mouths stretched wide. Women in tattered dresses, children with hollow eyes. A crowd pressing closer, reaching toward me, every one of them mouthing the same words. "Come with us. Stay." The tunnel began to collapse. Rocks rained down, the ground trembling beneath my feet. The figures did not flinch. They only stood, hands reaching, voices rising in one long, endless scream. Primera, Ryanae. I don't know how long or how far. The darkness seemed endless. The passages twisting, choking, trapping. Mortan, once, I thought I saw light ahead, only for it to vanish as I drew close. The voices followed me, never fading, only multiplying. At last, I saw a crack of daylight. I surged toward it, lungs burning, my flashlight flickering weak. I clawed my way out of the mouth of the mine. Just as the last light of evening died, the forest greeted me with silence. I collapsed on the ground, gasping, staring at the black mouth of Ashwood Mine. It was silent now, but I swear, as I turned to leave, I heard one last whisper rise from the dark. It was my voice, calling me back. I left that night. I don't know how I drove, how I even made it down the winding roads without crashing. My recorder was still running when I escaped, though when I played it back later, there was nothing but static. No screams, no whispers, nothing to prove what I'd heard. And yet, I know the truth, because sometimes, at night, when I'm drifting into sleep, I hear them again, the faint echoes of men crying out, of stone collapsing, of voices clawing against silence. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear my own voice among them, calling from the dark, waiting for me to answer. The Mourner of Blackthorn Hollow.
Stay.
There is a place in the northern countryside of England that no villager will enter after sunset. The hedgerows grow too thick there. The lanes twist in ways that make you feel lost even when you know the path well. And the mist that gathers at night clings like a shroud to everything it touches. This is Blackthorn Hollow, a valley that seems to brood beneath its own sorrow. And at the heart of that sorrow lies the mourner, a ghostly figure set to wander the hollow, weeping for something long lost, something no living soul has ever fully understood. The earliest mention of Blackthorn Hollow appears in parish records from the mid-1600s. Farmers at the time refused to graze cattle there. They complained of hearing a woman crying out amongst the hedges, though no woman was there. Some claimed to see a pale figure kneeling near the old stone bridge that crossed the creek. By 1703, a rector of the parish warned travelers in his sermon not to linger in the hollow after dusk, lest they become ensnared in her grief and wander forever lost. The legend was passed down through generations. Parents whispered the tale to children to keep them from playing too far afield. But the story is not just a warning. It is said the mourner is no ordinary spirit, but one who lures the unwary into her grief, trapping them within the hollow itself. No one knows exactly who she was in life. Some insist she was a widow, abandoned by her husband who left for war and never returned. Others believe she was a midwife, blamed for the deaths of infants during a plague, cast out and condemned by the very villagers she served. The oldest families in the region muttered that she was a witch, though not one who cursed, but one cursed herself, doomed to weep in endless sorrow. What makes the tale endure is not just the stories, but the disappearances. In 1821, a merchant's son traveling from Leeds vanished in the hollow. His horse was found tied to a gate, reins slack, as though the rider had simply dismounted and walked into the mist. His body was never recovered. A century later, in 1924, 2 children were reported missing after picking berries near the creek. Search parties scoured the hedgerow. Their cries were said to echo in the fog, yet no child was found. Their mother later claimed she heard a woman crying alongside my boys' voices, calling them deeper, deeper into the hollow. And then came the modern accounts drivers along the narrow country road, who reported slamming their brakes as a pale figure suddenly appeared in front of them, only to vanish when the fog cleared. Campers who dared to spend the night heard sobbing outside their tents, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps pacing closer. But perhaps the most chilling account came from a man named Arthur Green, a historian and amateur. In 1983, Arthur decided to spend the night in Blackthorn Hollow, with nothing but a lantern, a notebook, and a tape recorder. His journal was later recovered, damp and stained, found lying in the grass near the bridge. What it contained was disturbing. Arthur wrote that he had heard sobbing near midnight. He followed the sound to the creek, where he saw a woman dressed in a tattered black gown, kneeling in the mud. She was facing away from him, hair long and matted, her body rocking back and forth. He described the sorrow as a sound not of this earth, like the grief of centuries compressed into a single voice. He called out to her. The figure froze. Slowly, she turned. Arthur's final entry reads, her face was not flesh, but hollow. Her eyes were empty caverns, and from them poured not tears, but shadows. She reached for me, and I felt the cold of the grave itself. I cannot write more. If I linger, she will take me to. Arthur Green was never seen again. His notebook was all that remained. Even today, the Hollow has a reputation among paranormal investigators. Some come to test their courage, walk in the narrow paths with cameras and recorders. A few capture audio. Faint sobbing, indistinct whispers, the rustle of skirts moving through the hedges. One team claimed their equipment shut down simultaneously as they approached the stone bridge. When power returned, their cameras displayed minutes of footage showing only static and what seemed like a woman's voice, whispering, "Stay." Skeptics dismissed the stories as tricks of the fog and the imagination, but those who have lived in the villages surrounding Blackthorn Hollow do not scoff. They avoid the valley after dark. They keep their doors bolted when the mist creeps up from the fields. And when the church bell tolls on certain nights, echoing strangely down into the hollow, they whisper a prayer not for themselves, but for the mourner. For the legend says she cannot rest until someone shares her grief fully, until a living soul joins her in eternal sorrow. And in Blackthorn Hollow, sorrow has a way of finding you. Even now, if you walk too far past the hedgerows, past the creek, into the thick mist where the trees twist like mourners themselves, you may hear her. A cry soft at first, then louder, a woman weeping, calling for you to come closer. And if you do follow her voice, you may never walk out of Blackthorn Hollow again. Rejoignez-nous. The silent choir of St. Elara's Monastery. There are places in Canada's wilderness where the silence is heavier than sound itself, where the forests and lakes seem to hold their breath as if remembering something too dreadful to speak of. One such place is St. Elara's Monastery, or rather, what remains of it, nestled deep within the Laurentian mountains of Quebec. The ruined cloisters and shattered belfry lie, hidden beneath layers of moss and snow, a forgotten monument to faith and tragedy. Locals know the legend well. They call it the silent choir. For when the wind moves through the broken arches at night, it is said you can hear voices, not the whistling of air, not the trick of imagination, but the faint, chilling sound of monks singing in unison, a choir without bodies, a hymn without salvation. The monastery was built in 1826 by a small order of monks who sought solitude far from the encroaching world. They dedicated the place to Saint Elara, a little-known martyr, who was said to have sung hymns, even as she was executed. For decades, the monks lived in peace, tending their gardens, illuminating manuscripts, and ringing their bells across the valley. But peace is fragile, and in 1872, a blight swept the land, destroying crops and leaving the villagers in the nearby hamlet starving. They turned to the monks for help. The order had food stores, but under their vow of discipline, they could only share a portion. The villagers begged. 10 demanded. When the monks refused to surrender their winter stores, violence erupted. The monastery was stormed. The monks were dragged from their cells, beaten and bound. Intekapel abbot pleaded for mercy, but the mob, driven mad with hunger and fury, gave none, according to the lone surviving Akante journal later found half-burned in the rubble. The villagers forced the monks to kneel before the altar. One by one, they were struck down, their final chants silenced Yet as the abbot fell, his last words carried through the chapel. If our voices are silenced, they will rise again, forever. The villagers looted what they could and set fire to the monastery. But the fire did not consume it all. When the embers cooled, the stone walls remained, blackened but standing. And so too, it is said, did the voices. The first reports came that same winter. Hunters in the valley claimed they heard chanting drifting from the ruins, low and mournful, carried on the cold wind. Others said the voices did not simply echo but followed, circling, until the hunters fled in terror. By spring, the hamlet itself was abandoned, its people either scattered or vanished. Some believed guilt drove them away. Others whispered that the choir had come for them. Over the decades, travelers stumbled upon St. Elara's. Some left shaken, swearing never to return. Others never left at all. In 1921, a surveyor named James McAllister wrote of camping near the ruins. In his journal, found weeks later in his deserted tent, he described being awakened at midnight by a hymn so clear it rattled my bones. He claimed to see rows of monks standing within the chapel ruins, their faces shrouded, mouths open in eternal song. Terrified, he fled into the forest. He was never found. Only his journal remained. During World War II, 2 deserters seeking refuge in the mountains chose the monastery as their hideout. Days later, they were discovered lying on the chapel floor, mouths stretched open as if in mid-scream, though no wound marked them. Soldiers who found the bodies swore the air around them hummed with faint voices, like a choir holding a single unbroken note. The legend only grew. Paranormal investigators braved the site in the 1970s, recording strange audio that many claimed contained Gregorian chanting. One tape in particular was chilling. The sound of dozens of voices singing in harmony, before abruptly stopping, followed by a whisper, in French, saying, "Join us." Skeptics argued it was wind, acoustics, or outright hoaxes, but locals stayed away. Even hikers who knew nothing of the monastery reported a dreadful pressure in Devili, as though being watched by unseen eyes. Some said they heard footsteps pacing behind them, only to find themselves utterly alone. Others swore they saw robed figures drifting through the trees, moving in solemn procession toward the ruins. What makes the silent choir so feared is not merely the sound, but its lure. Those who hear it say it draws them closer, step by step, as though the hymn is pulling at something deep inside. Some resist, others do not. One chilling account from 1994 tells of 2 college students who camped near the monastery during a hiking trip. In the dead of night, one awoke to find her friend missing. She followed the sound of chanting to the chapel ruins and found her companion kneeling at the altar, eyes closed, lips moving silently in time with the invisible choir. When she shook her, the girl did not respond. She had to be dragged away bodily, screaming when torn from the ruins. Even after rescue, she whispered hymns in her sleep for weeks, unable to explain what had happened. Today, Saint Elara's Monastery stands in ruins still, unreachable except by hidden trails through dense forest. Its stones are slick with moss, its bell tower half collapsed, the altar scorched but somehow intact. Yet visitors say the silence there is unnatural, not peaceful. But waiting, and then, sometimes, the silence breaks. They say the hymn begins faintly, like a breeze at first. Then it grows stronger, layered, dozens of voices weaving together in a song no living soul remembers. It is not a song of joy, nor of grief, but of something eternal, something that grips your bones and fills your lungs until you feel you are sinking too, though no sound leaves your mouth. The silent choir, they say, does not forgive. It does not rest. It sings for those who were struck down, for vows broken and lives stolen. But it also sings for the living calling, beckoning, pulling them into the eternal chorus. And if you linger too long in the valley of St. Elara's Monastery, you may find yourself humming along. At first quietly, then louder, until your voice joins the hymn, and you realize you cannot stop. When the forest falls silent again, the ruins remain empty, but the choir grows stronger, and another voice has joined the song.